Well, hi everyone, this is James at Easy Fleeter. This is another how-to video. This time we're doing driver recruitment and selection and the things that you need to think about. So the recruitment process is your starting point. And before you do anything, you need to plan the recruitment process. So it involves strategy development. Now, strategy development is about understanding what the job is about, what the tasks are going to be, what you're going to achieve from that person doing the job, and where they could possibly go in terms of their career with your company. Then there's the search phase and how you're actually going to conduct a search. Then, of course, you need to screen the candidates to make sure they're suitable. And finally, there's the evaluation. Are they the right person for your company, the right driver for your company? But before you do anything, you need to think about whether you need to recruit in the first place. Can you reallocate the work to other drivers? Can you redesign work areas? So that's principally around the office area. But again, if you're talking about drivers, maybe you have a driver who is less able to climb up into a cab. Can they be reallocated to other areas of work? And actually, is that a consideration for when you look for a new driver? I think it is. Always look to promote internally as well. There's a lot of people who may actually want to become a driver, but they may never tell you that. Of course, you can train or upskill internally. So that means that if you're looking for somebody who's really competent and somebody you trust and has been with the company for some time, maybe you could invest in upskilling their driver license category, for example, so that they can actually start driving your HGVs. But the starting point is, of course, the job description. Now, a job description is not a list of tasks. It's a bit more than that. It's effectively an internal document which states the essential requirements for that candidate. And actually, it doesn't just tell candidates what you want. It reinforces what you want. And actually, it's a document that you can share internally across the company so that everybody's on the same page. It should include the duties, the skills, and the responsibilities. Those are three key areas for a job description. And it's essential to help match what you need with the experience of any candidate that comes to interview. Then, of course, you have the person specification. It's very important to get the right sort of person. And a person spec is an important part of your toolbox. It actually tells you the sort of person they are, how well they're going to do the job, and how they're going to perform within the team. Companies often solely rely on just the job specification, but of course that's just one item in your toolbox, if you like. Actually focusing on the job and not just the person is quite important in the recruitment process. And of course, it means you can communicate the traits that you want in a candidate. So it's not always about the professional qualifications or the professional experience. It may well be about how effective they are at speaking with your customers. Then, of course, you need to advertise. You need to get the right sort of candidate in, and you need to be sure that they can see your advert. So, base your advert on the job description and the person specification, both professional and personal. Make sure, if you have one, that you post it on the intranet so that all of your internal staff can see the job first. You never know who might want to do what in terms of career. Make sure you post it on notice boards. Lots of companies have notice boards up, particularly in the drivers area. If drivers become aware that you're looking for a driver because they see it on the notice board, they may well know somebody who fits the bill. Make sure you use social media. It's actually a very good tool to find candidates that you might not find using, I don't know, traditional methods such as newspapers or magazines. And actually you have a wider reach with social media. But you can also include job websites. Places like Indeed, for example, actually have, again, an even wider reach. Think about using recruitment agencies. They're not always ideal, but actually sometimes they may well fit the bill. Newspapers. So if you're looking for someone locally, again, you can always look at the advertising in newspapers, often very cheap option, but can be quite effective. Think about professional journals and magazines and publications. So if you're a member of any association, think about the advert in there. And then, of course, you've got leaflet drops. So if you want to go really local, there may well be someone in the village or the town who is the right person for you. And finally, there's open days. If you are a larger company, don't imagine that you can't have an open day. An open day is a really effective way, perhaps not at the moment in the time of pandemics, but actually once we're over that, an open day can mean that you find people and you see how they perform and interact with others. And it can be a really effective way of determining the right candidate for you. But of course, when you start getting applications coming in through whatever media you use to advertise, you need to know how to handle a response. What's the appropriate way of actually responding to candidates, both successful and not successful? Well, the most important thing is actually that you're professional. So regardless of how good you think a candidate is or how bad you think they are, just acknowledge their application, write back to them and make sure that they are aware of the fact that they weren't successful, and give a reason why that is. Always keep in mind the skills and experience that you're after. You may actually find that you get on with somebody, or there's something about their application that works really well, but they don't actually have the skills and experience. So always think back to your job specification and what you need them to achieve. It's a good idea to sort applications into 3 different piles. So you want one for interviews, one that you're considering, and one that you're going to reject. It's a bit harsh, but it's quite effective. And it means that you can really separate the wheat from the chaff in terms of what you need. Make sure you look for keywords that show an understanding of what's needed. So you need to know that they understand not just what they've read, but that what you need. So they've actually thought about the job. And it's very easy to choose people who have a raft of qualifications academically and vocationally, but it may not always be the right person. Sometimes if they're overqualified and they come into a position, they can often leave 6 months down the line, and you've invested all that time and energy and money into getting them on board, only for them to realize it's not for them because it's not challenging them enough. And very often that's the case with people who are overqualified, who do a job that is perhaps more basic than they're qualified to do. Make sure you create an interview shortlist. That's a very important process. And you've got to invite applicants for an interview. Of course, that's the final stage in handling the response. Then you need to consider where the interview is going to take place. Now, in a busy transport office, it's not ideal. You need to find a quiet room where you can concentrate and where the candidate can feel at ease. But you also need to consider the access for people who might be impaired in some way. Now, an impairment isn't always obvious, so you just need to make sure that you're not putting it up on the 7th floor and that it's accessible for everyone. Make sure it's private, because the worst thing is that people overhear, because they can influence the process, or it can be a distraction. You need a private, quiet place. Yeah, so find a quiet area or room in the building and ensure it's well lit. What you don't want to do is have a candidate sort of sitting down feeling like they're being interrogated. Make sure the room is well lit and that you can see each other very clearly. Plan the seating layout beforehand. Now, in this time of social distancing, I mean, that's a pretty obvious statement, but actually, once we get over the pandemic and things sort of settle back into normal life, you will need to think about the seating layout. So it's important because you don't necessarily want the candidate to be distracted by things out of a window. You don't want to be in a position where you can be distracted by people who might try and get your attention. Make sure that you think about how you're going to sit with the candidate. Make sure you avoid distractions. You know, it's a very easy thing to happen in an interview, and it can really put both you and the candidate off. And then, of course, there's preparation for the interview. So the quote at the bottom there, it's a conversation with a purpose. It's a really important thing to remember, is that it's a two-way conversation that you're having. And the purpose is to find out if the candidate is suitable for your job. You need to test the candidate's understanding. And that's not a formal test. You're not going to set them a series of questions. You don't need to do that. What you do need to do, however, is to be sure that they have the right skills and knowledge through natural dialogue, through conversation. It's your job to sell the company. Don't think, of course, the candidate is desperate for the job. They may have others. But you have to really sell the company and make sure that they are enthusiastic and understand that it's a great company to work for. And you need to exchange views. It's very important that it's a two-way street. And the purpose, of course, is to see if the candidate is not just suitable in terms of skills and knowledge and ability, but that they'll fit well in a team. If you choose the wrong candidates in terms of a team player, it can have such a knock-on effect with your existing staff. And mood really is everything. If you've got a happy team, they're more productive. It's more important than you might think. During the interview, you need to start with instructions. Explain who you are, what you do, and how you do it. Explain to the candidate the format of the meeting. What's the process? What are you going to talk about? How's it going to end? Think about the questions that you want to pose before the interview takes place. Don't just respond, and don't have it as a sort of a fluid two-way conversation. You need a bit of structure. Make sure that you include the questions that you need within that conversation. It's usually very helpful to actually come up with scenarios. So think about creating a scenario that might test the knowledge of the candidate. Always keep in mind it's a two-way conversation. You're not dictating and you're not allowing them to dictate to you. And the most important thing is you've got to listen. You know, this is your one chance to really understand who the candidate is and what their ability is. Be sure to take notes, because you can often get lost in the conversation, and then when they've left and gone out the door, you think, oh, what did they say? I can't remember. Important to take notes. And finally, explain the next steps. What can they expect in terms of timescale? How long is the process going to take? How will they be informed of the result? And if they're successful, what's the next step? Now, once the candidate has left, you need to think about ways or methods for selecting the right person. So think about having an assessment day. Now, an assessment day could be in addition to the formal interview process. And if you're thinking about drivers, this is really important because you need to know how good a driver they actually are. Are they going to be a risk in any way to your assets, i.e. your vehicles, and or vulnerable road users? It's really important to think about that. So consider having a practical assessment as part of the selection process. They can come in, get them insured on your vehicles, drive them around in the yard, obviously not on the public road, but in the yard, just to get a feel for how they drive, if you've got a yard big enough, of course. But it's just another way that you can understand how good they are as a driver. Psychometric testing sounds very scientific, but it's used by a lot of companies now. And you can equally use that for testing drivers. And this is about the person they are. This can tell you an awful lot. There's a lot of companies who will provide that for you. Just Google it and you'll find plenty of companies that are able to offer psychometric testing. Aptitude testing. So this is a bit different. This is their ability, and this is their attitude towards the job. And you can actually get somebody to test for that independently. Again, that's something useful for you to build up a picture with. Have a presentation. You know, it's actually quite a good idea to put up a PowerPoint, as long as it's not huge, because that puts people off. But if you put up a PowerPoint presentation, a short one, that's a great visual indicator as to what the company do. And it will help the candidate to understand a bit more about what you're after. The driving evaluation, so that's also part of the, I mentioned that in the assessment day, but it's a really good idea to have a driving evaluation. And then personality testing and appraisal. And again, that's all about the sort of person you're after and the type of person they actually are. Now, after all of that, once the interview process has finished, what do? Well, you have to evaluate the candidates. That's the most important thing. You have to start off with a long list of candidates. To help you along the way, compare notes with the job description and the person's specification. Start to build up a bit of a picture. Start to match up the candidate's abilities. If you want to clarify something about any particular aspect of a candidate, don't be afraid to ask them, and do that by phone, because that will give them encouragement that you want to know a bit more and that they've actually taken a step further down the line. And it'll mean that you're reassured that they've got the right skills or abilities or competencies or attributes that you're after. Make a list of candidates in order of preference. So have your top 10, for example. And again, that's a good idea to ensure that you have a priority. I mean, you can evaluate it beyond then, but it's a good idea to make a list of candidates that you prefer. And then you send a written offer to your top candidate once you've done all of that. I should say, when you make a list of those candidates in order of preference, you have to remember that you're not going on just personality. It's the whole package. So it's the personality, it's the professional ability, and it's the competence and how they came across. And of course, to all of those that didn't make it, then you need to provide a rejection letter, but it must include reasoning. Why did they not make it? What was the reason that they didn't make the cut? So often companies just send a standard letter. You were unsuccessful on this occasion, but there's no feedback. And actually, If you provide that feedback, even though they'll be disappointed because they're unsuccessful, that demonstrates that you as a company are a little bit more professional than the guy next door. The cost of getting it wrong. If you choose the wrong person, there are ramifications beyond maybe what you think there are. So you have to invest. Once these people start with your company, you have to invest in them. And that may be professional training and development. And that carries significant cost. If they're the wrong person in terms of driver, then you may end up with damage to your vehicles and or your products or your customers' products, which is the worst scenario. And you need to understand that there is a minimal risk to the successful candidate in terms of doing that. They may be dangerous or reckless out on the road. And again, that's a real issue, not just for the obvious, but also for the fact that it could reflect very badly on your company. They may be pretty poor in terms of productivity. They may be slow. They may not be able to deliver what you need within the timescale. It may have a knock-on effect with quality standards. If they have poor performance, then actually your overall standards of working may drop. It can also have a knock-on effect with other people. Of course, customers, they may well start to complain. If they're not happy with the performance of your driver, then they will likely complain and they will remember that complaint. And of course, the negative impact on colleagues is huge because you end up with an unhappy team and everything suffers as a result of that. So I hope that's been useful. If you'd like to know more, feel free to give me a call directly on 0800 133 7110, or feel free to email me at james@transmotion.co.uk. We do have this presentation available on our store to purchase. Alternatively, if you want more practical support, I can do that too. But for now, I hope it's been useful and thank you very much indeed.